Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 5th edition of the Decaturish.com Twitch show. I'm your host, editor, and publisher Dan Wisenhunt. Our guest today is King Williams. He's a local journalist and documentary filmmaker who writes a lot about affordable housing and gentrification. King, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing all right, man. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo, yes, the only holiday that you celebrate by making the people that you're celebrating serve you margaritas. It's a very strange holiday, but yes, happy Cinco de Mayo to anybody who's celebrating. Please do not drink and drive. Call yourself an Uber. Uh, George Chidi is out at a protest, I believe, but he is going to be joining in, and he will be jumping into our call shortly. So, King, talk to me a little bit about your work and some of the documentary projects. I know you did one that was sort of a solo documentary project about affordable housing, and you also did some work with Ken Burns as well, correct?
Yes, he's well, actually, not even. I never actually met Ken, but I think it's a good way to segue. So
Yep.
most people know me from one of three things, really. One, they know me from social media. Two, they know me from my time as a documentary filmmaker, where I did a series of short films on gentrification, and then a 34-minute short called The Atlanta Way. And it was something that for about a decade now, people have been wanting to see. And so it's a topic about gentrification in Atlanta, and it's really the framing of how we got to the place of gentrification in Atlanta. And I'm happy to say that that's going to be out in the fall. So that's how most people know me. But that also led into another documentary opportunity for a documentary that I worked on, which came out last year for PBS, which is entitled East Lake Meadows, a public housing story about the story of East Lake Meadows housing project. I got to do that one because I did a TED talk at my old university, Georgia State University, on East Lake Meadows and Atlanta and other things like that. And it got the attention of his daughter, Sarah Burns. And so she was looking through like things online, and then they kept seeing my name pop up through the things I did with Atlanta with all these short films, all the talks that I've been doing, and then this particular TED talk. And so they just asked me to come on as an associate producer, and then the rest is history. And then a third thing is about writing, which you kind of mentioned before. A lot of people know me as the guy who writes about gentrification and housing and affordability and things like that.
Cool, cool. That is quite a resume. Um, Tell us a little bit about the state of play right now in terms of affordable housing in Atlanta. And I will certainly not put myself out there as an expert, but I'll tell you my general understanding of it. We have a lot of income disparity in Atlanta. Not a whole lot of in between. We have a lot of people moving to Atlanta, and we
Mhm.
don't have a lot of places to put the people that are moving to Atlanta. Do I have that right, or is it? I'm sure there's more nuance there.
Now, you're pretty on the money. There's definitely a lot more nuance to it, but you're definitely on the money.
Okay, good.
So, no, you're not. What I tell people, though, is about affordable housing, you want to think of it this way, which is affordable housing is the type of thing that you want to have across the board, even though a lot of people are against affordable housing. But the other thing about affordable housing is not only is it something that you want, it's something that you have to think about in 10-year increments. And what I mean by that is not to say you build a house once every 10 years, right? But you want to think about 10 years from now, what does affordable housing look like and where is it going to be located? And so if you want to, we can get a little bit more into those two things, but I think that's what it's kind of important to understand about Atlanta's affordable housing
Yeah,
issue.
and that's we've dealt a lot with affordable housing here in Decatur, and there's plans to develop it at Legacy Park, and that is one of the things that keeps coming up. Is everyone's like affordable, like the affordable housing that we're talking about is not for like tomorrow. It's for 10 years from now. It's for, it's literally the things that they're doing now. Because it usually takes, you know, a good decade for any plan to come to fruition anyway. And so I'm glad you raised that point, is that it's always sort of a forward thinking thing. It's not like you can just turn around and, especially with lower margins.
Mhm.
So talk to me a little bit about what affordable housing is. Like, what would an affordable housing unit cost a
Okay.
family of four per month?
Oh, that's a good question. All right, so affordable housing, in short, is just housing that is affordable. And I want to be clear about this. We're not trying to be pejorative. What we're saying is that when it comes to housing, so it's two types of housing: either you rent or you own. That's pretty straightforward. And so when we talk about affordable housing, oftentimes we're talking about people who are renters. Affordable housing for people who are homeowners actually behaves a little differently. We can talk about that as well. But if you're a family of four, it's based on whatever your state's poverty line is for a family of four. And so I don't have the numbers up right in front of me right now, but I believe it was like around $20,000 a year or something like that. I don't have the numbers up, but let's say that is. And so when you say $20,000 a year for a family of four, so that could be a husband, wife, a husband and two kids, and a parent to take it, whatever. It's just four people who live in a house. And so when you talk about that, typically your rent is not supposed to be more than 30% of your income. So if you are lower income, that's about, give or take, a little over $6,000 per year. And so you can see why sometimes people really get upset in the affordable housing arguments, because people are saying, well, we should be providing housing for these people who make $20,000 a year. And to your point, it is just mathematically, I ain't gonna say impossible, it is very improbable right now in America across the board to have effectively a place that you can spend $6,000 in total, or a little bit. So if you're doing the math at home, that's actually less than $600 a month for a place for a family of four to live in. And so that becomes part of the problem, which is if you want to have affordable housing and if you want to do it right, you have to think long term. But if you want to do it short and get people in the building, you have to do some things I think people don't like, which is affordable housing for people who are now, for younger people or people who just can't afford it. It's probably going to have to be in two types of housing that is typically cheaper, housing that is older, or in places that can be easily developed immediately. So we're going to use Decatur for a good example. There's the city of Decatur, and then there's Decatur proper, like the rest of unincorporated Decatur. If you want to get affordable housing going, it's probably not going to be in the city of Decatur. It's probably going to be in unincorporated Decatur, because they have large parcels of land or homes that are older that you could effectively buy for a smaller amount, revamp for a smaller amount, and then get people moving in there within like 6 to 12 months. A lot of people don't like that because this is a controversial thing in the world of urbanism, which is what I'm coming from, which is effectively like a used car. If people can't afford a newer car, you don't give them a Mercedes. But if people can afford an older car, you build them into that. And so that might be one of the ways we get people in affordable housing now, which is to take older homes or lots that are available and start building homes in that space and then get people built into those things. And I see George has just got on the line as well.
George Chidi, how are you today, sir?
Hey, how are you? I hope this isn't too loud behind me.
George, give us a quick breakdown. What is going on where you are right now, sir?
So today, Richard Brooks was reinstated by the
Rayshard Brooks, or the officer who shot
not Richard
Garrett
Brooks,
Rolfe, right?
Of course not. I'm sorry. Garrett Rolfe, the police officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks, was reinstated as a police officer in Atlanta today. And about 30 protesters are standing on the steps of City Hall. They are chanting and they are surly, and I can't blame them. And I am observing the protest.
Gotcha. Well, stay safe as always, George. You know, we definitely want you to. So we were actually just
Take that kind of protest. Not today.
Yeah. So we're actually just talking with King Williams about his work, and I asked if he could give me a definition of what affordable is. And George, you've done a lot of work on this. So what is your definition of what affordable housing is?
So my definition is, let me start with this. Like, using AMI sucks. That's how they, like, annual median or average median, the area median income is a measure that is often used to describe affordability. Like anything that's under, that is supposed to be affordable, which is to say, under 30% of the income, the total income of somebody, if something costs 100% of that or less, it is considered affordable. Like if it is under the median income cap for that. The problem is that income in Atlanta is super duper choppy, and it is not an even bell curve. There are a lot of very poor people and a lot of rich people, not a lot of people in the middle, and so the median gets skewed. Um, so affordable to me, like if you're making $15 an hour and can afford to live there, I would call it affordable.
Gotcha.
But by that standard, there's basically nothing.
Right. There's like bupkis in Atlanta for that kind of price.
Yeah. So 15 an hour is 30,000 a year, give or take, which means the expectation you would be paying about 8,000 in a year, which is something less than $700 a month. And there is nothing for $700 a month that anybody would want to live in within 50 miles of where I'm standing right now.
So, whose responsibility ultimately is it to provide for affordable housing, do you think? King or George?
You want to go first?
Yeah, you can go first, George.
Okay. I think it's a mix. I think that a regulated housing market could get there. That doesn't necessarily mean rent caps. I'm not necessarily talking about like rent freezes or rent control. But if you're not going to have rent control, you need to be super aggressive about allowing zoning for, private entities to build affordable housing, to build condominiums, skyscrapers that are large enough. Like, basically, you need enough supply to drive down the cost. And if you're not going to do that, then you really do need to start looking at using public money somehow, either to subsidize rent or to build housing. And the problem is, as soon as you start talking about a rent subsidy, it turns into, oh no, Section 8 in my neighborhood. And if you start talking about public housing, you get that effect on steroids, even though it's really one or the other. There are only so many ways you get there. Either everybody is making $30 an hour and can afford it, or you have some combination of public housing and rental subsidies. There's nothing else. I've got nothing else.
King, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so it's in my opinion that it's kind of what George is saying. I'm gonna take a little bit of a different approach, which is one, I personally believe that it is for the health of America, any other country, that we have as many people housed as possible, if not 100% of all people housed, if possible. But I do understand the market realities of that sometimes don't necessarily make sense. And so what I mean by that is that in the case of Atlanta, I think right before George got on, we were talking about how just the time it takes to build things. If we're talking about affordable housing and who's responsible for it in the marketplace itself, it's going to have to take a combination of both a private market and a public market, both working independently and together. And it's something I've been saying in some of my speeches for the last few years, even prior to the pandemic, which is I believe public housing is coming back for many of the reasons that we're seeing now. I think we're just going to get to the point where we realize maybe voucher housing isn't the way to go in terms of just the amount of spend, who gets it, where is it concentrated, who accepts it and who doesn't. And I strongly believe that we're going to see maybe not necessarily an FDR level of public housing across America, but you will start to see a lot of city and federal government intervention to kind of provide more people housing, especially with some of the demographic trends of what America is. And I think it's going to be interesting because I think the people who are actually going to get affordable housing aren't going to be the people we think. And I think it's going to be with the elderly primarily and the veterans first. And so I think that wave will probably start within this decade, but it really take off maybe in the 2030s of this notion of the government providing housing for people.
I mean, do local governments even have the tools in their toolbox to address this? Because that's one thing that, especially in Decatur, Decatur is a city that's known for biting off more than it can chew sometimes. But they also are a city that tries to tackle problems that other cities ignore. They don't always get it right, but they do try to at least pay some attention to that. But are local cities even remotely equipped to do affordable housing at any kind of scale?
George, or do you want me to go first? I have an answer for that.
I have an opinion. Like, so I think it's primarily a federal problem. And I think primarily it's a federal problem because wages, like the wage floor, is set by the federal government effectively. Like, to the degree that state government can set a wage floor in a market, yeah, I think that the state government there has some play. Ultimately, if we're talking about how a local government addresses affordable housing, so local governments have zoning control and they have the ability to float a bond. And both of those two things can be used to address affordable housing. Like, the problem, of course, is that there's only so much you can do in terms of zoning land so that it can be used for high density, multifamily housing. And there's only so much you can do in terms of creating an indenture, like a debit, like on the tax base. Like, there's some of that's political. Like, the statutory cap in Georgia is 10% of the taxable value of a municipality. Like, that's how much community could bond. Like, that's how much money they could borrow. Like, nobody's anywhere near that. And anybody who's starting to get close to it, like any government that did it, would get smoked. Like, the public would vote them out. But they don't have to. Like, I mean, just as a practical legal matter, like, if the public's down with floating $1 billion bond in order to create enough affordable housing to manage something, then local governments can act. Here's the thing: you get this like economic commons problem, where if one community is working very well at dealing with affordable housing issues, and the community next door over isn't, that community is free riding. And as long as you've got this free ridership problem, like, every community is it's just game theory. They're gonna beggar each other, which is kind of where we are right now. It's why you need big state level or federal level mandates around this stuff.
Mr.
I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I agree on that statement. I do think that is probably how this is going to play out in Georgia in particular. I do think, though, in the case of our states or state level agencies able to handle affordable housing, I think in some regards Decatur does it well, even though they bite off a lot more than they can chew, because Decatur's looked at for many people as the resource on how to make affordable housing work, right? And I think that if Decatur, let's say, had the money of what the Atlanta Housing Authority had, I think we're having a very different conversation. And I just think that, now granted, they are two different sizes, two different entities with two different sets of problems. But I do think you're going to start finding this issue, what George said, is where in order to do it, you're going to have to get a lot of money up for these projects. And that's going to be a political suicide. But I think many agencies are prepared to do it. The political ramifications, though, aren't, because in the end of the day, red or blue, city or town, nobody really wants to have affordable housing because they assume poor people are going to be like Dawn of the Dead and like take over their homes or something. And so no one really wants to be around that. And I think that's going to be the biggest issue going forward. So I do think in many cases, George is correct. But I think there are people who are capable of doing it, especially if you're in a place like Decatur, East Point. South Fulton is about to do some interesting things. I've had a couple of conversations with people out there, so I'm interested to see what happens on that space. But I do think that they just don't have the money to do it, or the political strength to do it.
Follow up on something you said, or you said people are actually looking to Decatur, and how they're dealing with affordable. This is news to me. Please elaborate, because every time I hear about Decatur, it's always they're behind the eight ball. I feel like that they get more pressure than other cities because they're actually trying to engage with it in ways that other cities can't or won't. But please elaborate on that, because I would love to hear more.
Yeah, so before, especially pre-pandemic, I do a lot of talks to like different organizations, community groups, real estate conferences, and schools. And so oftentimes the city of Decatur comes up just because of what they've done to even build that affordable housing and maintain the stock that they even have there. And even some of the plans that they have are still light years compared to other housing authorities I'm not going to say any names. I have talked to two people. These are metro area housing authorities. I've talked to two people in two different counties on this, and they were looking to how did Decatur even get that far off the ground first, because these are affluent counties. They're not the counties that you would think of off the top of your head, but they're starting to consider, hey, you know, we have a workforce that needs affordable housing. We have a growing group of seniors who have affordable group who need housing, and we have these people who are moving to the county for different reasons, and we know that they're not going to be able to afford the growth that's happening. So a lot of people have talked to me, hey, what is Decatur doing differently? How did they get this many units up? How is it that their affordable housing units hasn't dropped the property values down, particularly around the school and some other things? So I've heard Decatur come up quite a few times.
Interesting. Well, I definitely think
I actually have to agree with him there. Okay, yeah, we have this sort of mental image of Decatur with $450,000 and $500,000 house averages, and you know, basically rich white people. But it's not. It's a lie. It's diversity is weird in Decatur, and you could go downtown in Decatur, and you don't have to hunt to find public housing. Like it's right there across the street from the school.
Mm-hmm.
And if you compare that to, say, Brookhaven or Lawrenceville or Suwannee or Marietta, they're head and shoulders above their peer cities in the region. Like Decatur pops out in part because their peer cities in the region are garbage, unaffordable housing. And I'm right there with it. By the way, I am a tremendous fan of yours. I need to tell you that.
Hey, we all three of us, we should meet up at some point. I've never met any of y'all, but I've heard y'all names a bunch. So
let's do it. I've got my vaccine. Let's do it.
I got my vaccine too, so we can make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. I like surrounding myself with people who are smarter than I am. Makes me look good. So let me talk about the scenario that's going on with Decatur and their plan to use Legacy Park. So for people who don't know, who might be watching, Legacy Park used to be the United Methodist Children's Home campus. Decatur spent $40 million to buy it because they wanted to control that gateway into the city. And one of the plans that was always a part of it was to do some kind of an affordable housing development. But where things got interesting is when they started looking at the feasibility of it. And they said that even if they gave the developer the land, didn't sell it to him, just gifted it to him, that they would still need some kind of a bond or some other kind of subsidy to entice a developer to get invested in a project like that. And developers are there to make money. It's that's just the system we live in. They are there to make money, but you do need to have them at the table at some level to do these kinds of projects. So my question to the both of you is, how do you get the development community to the table on this, and what's in it for them? Because they're not going to do it for altruistic reasons. How do you get them to the table and engaged in, or can you? Is that even possible?
I think that it's going to take, in terms of the development community engaged, I think it's going to take the reality that most developers aren't going to do unless the dollar amount just makes sense, period, which is, it's just like a come to Jesus moment we got to have. The other one is especially a lot of the smaller nonprofit developers, we got to start figuring out, do we scale back our plans and let maybe the smaller and nonprofit developers take this challenge on, who will be less, but also don't have necessarily the experience to build on the level that we need. And that may change our plans. But I do think that if we're talking major developers in Metro Atlanta, none of them are going to bite right now because the market is in their favor. And especially if they're not going to get the price point that they want. So I do think we just got to have that come to Jesus moment about that.
George?
Yeah, I think there's a place for incentives. I hate the idea that you've got to give away the farm in Atlanta, of all places. Everybody and their brother's moving here, 75,000 people a year, moving to Metro Atlanta. They've got to live somewhere. And
George?
Oh no.
Do we lose you?
Oh no, I hope you're there, George.
We might have lost George. That's okay. He'll jump back in. Um, so King, Kathy Harris does a lot of the work.
Can be done
George,
with tax credits.
we lost you for a good 30 seconds there, my friend.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back
Yes,
now.
you're back.
Yeah. So I think some of this can be managed with tax credits in the sense that, or like, if you're going to develop anything, like Atlanta's got an interesting sort of take on this. They like a development that has 15% of its housing stock that is affordable, and we can argue again about like this AMI shit, but I'm swearing. Sorry. We can argue about AMI, but Atlanta set a 15% threshold. If you're going to build where like 15% of your units are going to be affordable, according to the area median income, they give you a density bonus, which will let you build more, which will let you sell more, which theoretically will increase your profitability more than what the loss of profit on those units would cost you. Like, if you don't want to do that, you pay an extra. You can build whatever you want, but you've got to pay a premium into the city, which is supposed to be used to build affordable housing somewhere else. Just straight up, the city's gonna like takes over an old MARTA station and builds houses, like builds apartments on top of it. Like that. My criticism of Atlanta in this is that I don't think it's aggressive enough. Like, I think 15% is too small. Like, I think the AMI number is too high. Like, developers are going to want to build here. Like, we're the best market in the world right now. Like us, and I think maybe like, what was it, like Provo, Utah, or something like that. Like, we don't have to give away a lot. We can, like, there's a tax policy that gets at some of this. The problem is developers are political players, and they'll write giant checks and keep this stuff from happening by making sure the right people get elected. And we're seeing it right now.
George, can you talk to? I feel like this touches on this a little bit. George, for those of you who don't know, writes the Atlanta Objective. It's a paid Substack newsletter. I am a subscriber to George, and King, you have a Substack as well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You do. What's your Substack called?
It's just my name. I am King Williams.
I'm King Williams.
Yep.
George, you wrote a piece recently about the Summerhill neighborhood. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So Summerhill is a neighborhood just south of I-20. It's basically right next to Grant Park. And for a long time, it was economically troubled. That pretty much stopped about 20 years ago. But for a long time, Summerhill was difficult. Let me just put it like that. It's not now. It's gentrified 8 ways to Sunday. Doctors, lawyers, jewel thieves, mob bosses. It's a good place to live. Lots of renovation, lots of new park stuff, not lots of, like, it's getting bougie. And the problem, of course, is that like the neighborhood is getting this way. And so the folks who both have lived there for a long time and new folks who think they've got an investment to protect get real pissy when they think something's going to threaten their prosperity. So in comes the city that's using the old Ramada over by Turner Field as a shelter for, like, a transitional shelter for homelessness. And they basically got them to stop. Like, Catherine Marchman from the city's Partners for Home nonprofit. Solidarity honking. Like, basically has had to vacate, and she's leaving that in a month. It's the most successful anti-homelessness program the city has had over this short a period of time that I can see in its history. And now they're scrambling because Summerhill doesn't want them there. Like, and this sort of NIMBY bullshit is rampant all over the city, and it screws everything up. And it's why we have the homeless issue we have, in part.
Well, I mean, does not the Summer Hill community have a point there, George? I mean, they don't do that kind of stuff in
Yes.
Buckhead.
I don't want to dump on them all that much. I mean, like, they've been the city's dumping ground for a long time. They've got a reason to be pissed off. But they're not now. Like, and the real problem is, like, there's no leadership at the top to parcel out responsibilities neighborhood by neighborhood so that everybody is aware that things are fair. Like, so everybody fights with knives and sticks, assuming that if they don't, they're the one that's going to get screwed.
So this leads me to another question. Is gentrification always bad?
I don't think so. I want to hear, boy, do I want to hear what King Williams has got to say about that.
Okay, I get this I get this all day. So gentrification in itself is bad by both definition, by etymology, by the person who gave us the study that we know is gentrification, Ruth Glass, and she makes a clear distinction between revitalization and good development versus gentrification. And I think that's something that's super important to note. Ruth Glass, OG, out of London, she bases gentrification off the word gentry, which has its own connotation. She kind of brings it up in a lot of her work, particularly in the 1960s, particularly her works in 64 and 65. She's writing about this in particular, how gentry, like the historic connotation of London gentry and the feudal system of feudal England is kind of taking place now in that point in time, contemporary London, right? And so she makes a clear distinction. Like, there is a difference between how do you revitalize something that's beneficial to everyone and gentrifying it, which is the powers that be dictate what is going to happen, or the people who serve the powers that be dictate what's going to happen. And so that's my answer to that one. So I know that's probably not the answer that anybody wanted, but it is the answer that I
That's
know.
actually a very illuminating answer and one I had not heard before.
I'll be back in a minute.
What?
Okay. I think he's going to be back for a minute. I think it's got a little noisy.
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, that's actually very illuminating and an answer I had not actually heard before. So that actually does make it a little bit easier to parse out in my mind, rather than having a blanket term that applies to all of it. And the reason I ask that is because Summerhill has benefited from the revitalization that you talked about, and they, their attitude is basically, why us? Why are we always the people that, why don't you build a homeless shelter in Buckhead? And of course, we all know the answer to that, but
I think they should. That would be so much and so fun to see how that plays out. What happened in Buckhead?
I'm really gonna have fun dunking on the city of Buckhead for a while. Mainly because their whole rationale for doing this is better police protection. And all I have to say is they are seriously underestimating how freaking expensive it is to run a police department of any size for any city. And I mean, they might have the money to do it, but they're not going to do it cheaply. It's going to be way more expensive to live there. So if that's the whole reason that they're looking into, forming a city is police protection, I mean, I'm not sure that they're not going to end up having a service agreement with Atlanta at the end of the day,
Yeah. Oh, can we talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
All right. So the Buckhead thing is interesting to me because, to your point, so I think people need to understand this, I guess, especially your listeners. One, Buckhead is the most, outside of a few federal, the Federal Reserve that we have in Atlanta, obviously, and a lot of our military bases, Buckhead as an actual residential area is the most secure area in the entire state of Georgia. I'm talking about all of the state of Georgia. And so also, because of what Buckhead is, and I think people need to understand this, is Buckhead already has a police precinct up there. Buckhead already has now
Zone 2, right?
Yeah, 2. And we also know that several city council members have put more money into having a shadow police agency also in Buckhead. This is on top of a place that already has more security cameras for residential homes than anyone else, more private security officers maintaining the grounds than anyone else. And that's not including places like the Atlanta History Center, the schools that are up there, that already have their own private security as well as any of the businesses that also have security cameras and private security. So not only does it have more security from both the city of Atlanta on just on what we know level, it also has like the secondary level of security and protection, but also it has private security. So I think a lot of people up there, and I've seen some of the chatter in the Buckhead groups about this. I guess they figure they're gonna have like a legit Fallujah style setup where they have people at every gate and every stop to kind of checkpoint people, and I think that that's kind of the vibe I get from a lot of those Buckhead Facebook groups. And like in reality of it is most of the crime that's been happening in Buckhead has been happening in primarily three areas: areas that have nightlife, areas that have very lax or no gun restrictions, and two, also a place that people are congregating because nothing else is open. And I think that it's been really interesting to see how that's played out, because when you talk about the number of shootings that happen at Lennox, Lennox is a private business. Lennox has already stated that all the shootings there happen from people who are not in Atlanta, right? But when you go on the Buckhead Facebook group, you think that that is just like kids from like the west side of Atlanta or something, or Bankhead just shooting up the place. In reality, these are people who are coming in for All-Star Weekend, people who are coming in because their state is closed for business and they're coming in town. Their case in point, I know your listeners probably don't listen to this podcast. I'm just going to bring this up now. But the Joe Budden Podcast, which is one of like the top hip hop podcasts in the country, well over 1 million, like 2 or 3 million listens on Apple Podcasts, and then it does really well on YouTube. Almost every week since the pandemic it started, it's like, oh, what's going on in Atlanta this weekend? What's going on in Atlanta this weekend? Who's doing what? Or, you know, and so you have that, then you have all these other secondary things of people who believe that A, Atlanta is open, B, I can bring my weapon to Atlanta, and C, in the case of some of the shootings that happened last summer, especially, there's a lot of people from Chicago doing shootings, bringing up, you know, sometimes a lot of the issues they have from Chicago to Atlanta. And I think that that's the nuance of what the Buckhead debate is missing, which is most of this is happening from people not in Atlanta, happening at a nightlife venue, or happening in a place that people are aware of, like Lennox or like the little Buckhead Atlanta place. And it's not really happening at their front door, even though the Buckhead groups make you think that somebody, it's like the purge outside of their door every single day. So
Yeah, I covered Buckhead for a few years, and that's generally accurate. It is one of the safest places in Atlanta, but they think that the barbarians are at the gates all the time, waiting for the world to crash down on their head. But that's really interesting about the podcast. I did not know that, and I did not know how our own COVID policy might have factored into some of that a little bit. So,
oh, not even might have, for sure.
for
Because
sure
especially
did. Yeah.
yeah, All-Star Weekend, I'm going to tell you right now, the number of people who are in the Shade Room comments or on Black Twitter or in all like the podcasts I said before, were like, oh, I'm going to Atlanta this weekend, I'm going to Atlanta for All-Star, was no matter what Keith Lance Bottom said, the national chatter was different, because you have in some cases like 25, 35,000 people an hour, like on Twitter, just talking about how they're going to come to Atlanta. I guess, obviously everyone didn't come down, but when you look at the surge of an extra 100,000 people coming down for All-Star Weekend that we weren't expecting, despite what the mayor said, then that's the case, right? And so when every bar and club and cigar lounge is all like, hey, come, we have bottles, we have sections, that's also the thing. And then somebody who's talking to a lot of these nightlife venues, whether it be strip clubs, whatever, they're just like, hey, these people aren't from Atlanta who are coming. So that's the thing I think people need to understand. Most of this is not happening with people from Atlanta, because they're mostly just avoiding this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But our perception is, oh man, you can do whatever you want. It's the Wild Wild West out here, and people are treating it as such.
So how do you fix that? Is that like a state policy thing? I mean,
You can, but I don't think people are gonna like the answer to that. And so the answer would be, one, the police would just have to buy in and realize, hey, what happened last summer is a lot of stuff happened. You should be critiqued, and as much as you want to, like, I don't even want to know your stance on this one. So I'm gonna say this is me speaking as a person, not necessarily Dan or Decaturish. A lot of the criticisms that happen to police, you have to be okay with that, right? You sign up for a job that requires criticism, and so you can't walk off the job because you're criticized, right? And so that's something you just got to think about. And also, too, policing requires proactiveness. It's one of the fundamental pillars of policing. And I mean this is not like as an actual like a talk down, but by what the police actually is. I've been doing a lot of the history and the history of police, and American police based out of the London system of policing. And that is one of the key tenets of that. And even Atlanta, even if you look today on the city of Atlanta's website in the charter for the police, proactive policing. So you have to understand, you have to have criticism. You're going to have to probably go to every place I mentioned before. That means you're going to have units at Lennox. You're going to have to have units at every cigar lounge, every strip club, every bar, every open parking lot on the weekend, because that's where young kids are going to, and people primarily from outside are coming in because there's nothing else to do in their home states. Most people coming in are coming from the Northeast. They're coming up from Miami. not like people like we're coming down to Miami, but Miami people from Miami come up to Atlanta because they want to get away from Miami. So go where the things are going to be at. And I think that that's going to, and the mayor's kind of tiptoeing around it right now about this thing about liquor licenses. But if you want to stop it, you could probably see an overnight result if you just say, all right, we're going to go to every nightlife venue, every retail venue. We're going to have more officers posted than we did before. And that means we're going to probably have to be proactive in parking lots. We're going to have to be more proactive, especially around young boys. And I think it's young boys, so young men, particularly between 15 and 25, who are doing a lot of these shootings. And most of the shootings are just happening over arguments. People get mad, somebody shoots somebody. So that means you're probably going to have to do a lot of stops and stop and frisk, which is something I don't personally agree with because I had to live through that in New York City. But it is going to probably come to something like that. And I think that it's going to create a gulf. It's going to make people feel safer because you will see a drop in crime, but it's also going to piss off a different group of people. But that's my answer. And I think that's probably end up how it's going to play out in real time.
So, wait, are you telling me that young men are poor decision makers? Is that what you're telling me?
I am a young man. I've made a lot of poor decisions, but I will say most of the...
Never made a poor decision in my life. What are you talking about?
Well, a lot of the poor decisions, what was it? I think one of the guys, Justin Gray, had tweeted out that there were 20 shootings in Atlanta, right? And on surface value, like, you was like, oh man, 20 people got shot. What's going on? And it's like, break it down. Okay, outside of like a nightclub, outside of a strip club, two men are arguing. One guy shoots at another guy, hits somebody else, and then it becomes like this notion of like the crime isn't really, the narrative isn't being like contextualized, but it's mostly young men arguing, young men, especially outside these nightlife venues, who are shooting at each other. And we got to just be honest with what that is.
So let me counter that argument a little bit. Okay, proactive policing. Doesn't that just increase the odds that we're going to have another situation like with Rashard Brooks?
Right, that's what I'm saying. I do agree with, the Rashard Brooks was just like out of hand. Like this man was clearly not a threat. But I do agree with you on two. That's why I said like this isn't something that's going to be a liked thing, but I do think that's going to actually happen, especially if the mayor's got to win again. She's got to go aggressive on this now, because the longer this goes on, especially with her new police chief now, if they look like they're soft on crime too, their gooses are both cooked, which is why I think that that's probably what's going to happen. It's not to say I endorse it, but I do think that's what's going to happen.
Interesting. George?
Yeah, I've got it's a funny thing. We were just like part of the reason I had to step away is because I was having almost exactly this conversation with one of the organizers a moment ago. Hang on a second. I'm looking for my car. There it is. So the thing I'm concerned about is that there's been a fundamental erosion in the relationship between the police and the public right now. And I think that's contributing to the increase in crime in Atlanta. People aren't calling the cops. Like little neighborhood beef or domestic stuff turns into something much more serious because people are afraid either that the cops are going to shoot them, or more likely that the cops will surface some sort of lease violation, which will allow them to be evicted despite the CDC order. And as a result, like you get less interaction with police that's positive, that's healthy and beneficial, or sorting out something. And all that's left is a lot of unwanted negative interaction, which makes the problem worse. I fear that we're in this this negative feedback loop right now that isn't easily broken because of the pandemic. I think that's part of the reason we've had the spike that we have. Community policing is real. It works when it's done right. But we're not getting that right now. And in part, and by the way, that's measurable. I've seen the data. Community policing patrols spiked actually at the start of the pandemic in Atlanta. There was a 250% increase in community policing patrols from March until June of 2020. And then when the street protests happened and Rayshard Brooks was killed, all of that went away and then some, because cops decided that any kind of proactive policing put them in a position for potentially doing something bad and going to jail, or losing their job or something. And the psychology of that, the policing psychology of that is horrid. It's terrifying that that's the calculation they made. But they did. We had this blue flu thing break out. And frankly, I don't think the city's recovered from that yet.
No, I would agree on that one, and I think that I'm gonna have a hot take. I don't think the city recovers until they figure out who the mayor is. So what is it now? May. So I think for the next 6 months, we're probably not going to see a recovery like you think.
So, one of the reasons, King, that our reporter Logan Ritchie suggested I invite you on, other than the fact that you always retweet our stuff, which is nice, but you actually had a really nice tweet thread about the Black Hall Studios situation.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really want to talk to you about that. So, for readers who don't know, Black Hall Studios is a film production studio in DeKalb County. They negotiated a land swap with DeKalb County government, where they would get some county-owned land, county would get some of their land, and the plan was that Black Hall Studios was gonna, invest in, and apparently that's still the plan. But Black Hall Studios turned around and was bought out by a company in L.A. And King, you had a lot to say about that. Can you kind of recap some of what your thoughts were on that for us?
Okay. I'm gonna say this now. I grew up most of my life. All my life, I've either lived in Atlanta, like on the east side of town, like East Atlanta, Decatur area, or in like the New York City, northern New Jersey area, right? And so one of the things I noticed with the Black Hall deal is I've actually been attending a lot of those community meetings out there, primarily out in Ellenwood and things like that, in Gresham Park. So I'm saying this from experience, right? I was tweeting about once the Black Hall thing got sold, I was like, okay, it got sold for $120 million to an LA-based private equity company. And it stood out to me because, one, I didn't know Black Hall was even up for sale. It didn't, nothing that I'd seen about them showed me that they were prepping to be sold. But in retrospect, I should have known that when you're trying to get a land swap and you're working really hard on getting that land swap, that you're probably either going to expand or try to flip your asset, right? I just didn't think about that in retrospect, but I should have. But the main reason I did that Twitter thread is that I think that people in Atlanta, now granted, some of the people who watch your show are people who are more active, but the average everyday Atlantan does not understand what's going to happen next as a lot of big money from big money markets starts coming into Atlanta. And so the whole premise of the tweet thread was that Black Hall Studio is probably the first of many deals of big money coming into a city like Atlanta, and I outlined some reasons as to why. And I don't think that the average Atlantan, whether you live in the city or the suburbs, are going to understand what that means when big money comes into your city, because the way we've governed before as a city, a metro, and as a state is about to be turned upside down, because we're not playing on the game of what a major market is, despite our decades of saying that we were. And so that's the whole premise of the Twitter thread. And if you want to, I can get more into that. But that was like,
yes, please elaborate. What do we need to know here?
Okay, because I see George looking like engaged about this too. So I was like,
yeah, because you get bits and pieces of it, but I think the flood's coming. I think you're dead on. Think about the Gulch deal downtown in Atlanta, which is now they're starting to turn dirt, but that was all LA money.
Yeah, and so case in point, jump a little bit into my thread. So I mentioned that maybe at the halfway point in my thread, CIM, which is the California Los Angeles based group, they've had their own history of using either money or political influence on both the city level, the county level, the state level to get things going. They spend millions of dollars lobbying things, and they got the Gulch deal basically by just having effectively a robocall campaign and a website pop up saying, hey, why the Gulch is going to be good, and their commitment to affordable housing for people. It was I was honestly surprised that the Atlanta City Council voted the way they did on that one, especially without any real scrutiny. It was just hey, big new shiny product. And I saw a lot of the local Atlanta business boosters talking about it, but I'm if you know anything of what they did in LA and how hard they've had to work to even get some of their bigger deals off the ground, Atlanta should be cautious. But I do think there's a general gulf between a lot of our policymakers and what big money markets are going to do. And CIM's using effectively maybe $50,000 to make a website, create some robocalls, and get stuff going to get $1.7 billion in city funds to help co-build their development is a bad sign going forward, right? Which is, I'm going to say this now, we're talking about City of Atlanta, City Council, but expand this to the state level government, whether or not you're red or blue, it doesn't matter. I just don't think our lawmakers are prepared for being in a big time position, right? But it's going to keep happening. And the reason I'm bringing that up in the Twitter thread is that Newport is downtown. And if Newport really wants to press their money, they can. They're a German-based company. You have CIM down in the Gulch. You have now this new private equity firm that just bought um, uh, what's the place right off of Blackhall. You had Pinewood. I think people forgot about this. Pinewood was a UK-based company, and they flipped that to another company. And while we're going to be focused on like the film aspect of it, because like the sound stages are just a bigger thing, people can physically see it. When NCR relocates, or when Amazon was trying to do HQ2 and they're about to give up basically everyone, including my mama, to make sure Amazon came down here, these companies are going to play on a different level. And what I mean by that is not only they're going to ask for tax breaks, not only they're going to ask for land use, they're going to also start making their sway known politically, because they come from markets where they face a lot of opposition, both from conservatives and liberals, and they have decades of experience on how to deal with this. And so you local city council man trying to get like Brookhaven to get, or in the case, I'm going to use a real example, Group, which is a German-based company, which is now developing their North American headquarters near the Battery. Cobb County given as much money as they did to Group, and on top of what they've given to the Braves and Liberty Media to build out the Battery, is just showing me that Atlanta is going to eventually go into one particular phase that I don't think we're going to like, which is we're going to have to be so indebted as tax-based policy to grow that it's going to eventually like cause us to either shut down, sell off a whole bunch of assets, and become a much weaker form of governance going forward. Because in doing all the things I tweeted about, right? So like when Disney comes in, they do business. When Netflix comes here, they do business. As much as people say just, come and do the money, they have a politic. Their workers have a politic to it. And while the boards themselves may be conservative and their leadership may be conservative, their middle management and their lower workers are not. And so they're going to step up for more things. We saw this back in 2018, 2019, when the governor signed the abortion bill. And we also starting to see it now with like the people who are threatening to boycott to leave Georgia for film productions. As much as people say, well, film can just leave, we'll put the tax money in there. It's not an either or. Like that Will Smith movie that was going to come down here, they were going to probably spend $100 million in real dollars in the state of Georgia. And I think we have to be honest about that. That $100 million is not new tax money that all of a sudden just grows. It is money that we're taking from that particular entity that has done business here. And so it becomes an issue where national liberal policies are going to start meeting conservative fiscal realities, and those two things don't mesh. And as much as we kind of try to say that we're an impartial state or just not engaged with it, we're about to get our asses handed to us, because everybody coming in. So LA-based money is coming in right now. New York-based money is coming in. There's going to be a slow trickling in, especially with the startup community, of VC money out of Silicon Valley. And so what happens, especially with that case in particular, is once that money starts trickling in more, when you have like a different libertarian kind of free market ethos of what they're bringing out from the West Coast, they're about to destroy the Metro Atlanta. And we're going to let them do it because we honestly just want to say that, hey, we're open for business, Silicon Valley. And we're not ready for that. And so it's going to happen because Atlanta sits in a great market. We're on the East Coast. We have a lot of things. We have the Port of Savannah that's 4 hours away. We have the airport, which is going to expand again, which makes it easier to get a flight anywhere in the world within 24 hours. So it has a lot going for it. And the reason why that is going to be the reason why we keep bringing in more money is because just right now, the North Carolina Triangle is not developed enough. Nashville is not nowhere near developed enough. Charlotte is not developed enough. And even though they are smaller and nipping at the heels of Atlanta's political infrastructure, which allows you to do pretty much what you want for minimal taxation, minimal government oversight, it's still better than what those markets have to offer, especially a place like Tennessee, which is going to not even charge you on state tax, or even like South Florida and Miami, which is having like a little bit of a renaissance. Atlanta is better fit for like a mature business. And because we're we're able to attract in mature businesses, we're going to attract in all of their problems and all their pluses. And so our government is just not ready for that. Like they're not, and I think they're going to get their ass handed to it for the next decade or so.
So our leaders are all a bunch of hicks, basically.
No, we're not a bunch of hicks. It's just like, it's like the Mike Tyson quote, like everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth,
Yeah.
And so
everyone. And that's the thing though, like at some point, somebody really is going to get hit in the mouth.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I was wondering what the wake up is.
I think it's going to come from the film industry first. And the reason why I say that is because we got to wait 18 months to see how this thing's going to shake out with the likely Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp rematch. Yep. And it's not necessarily about liberal conservative as much as it is about the voting rights issue. And I say this because a lot of people are very concerned about their ability to vote and where the country is going to go on a macro level. people also are willing to let a lot of the Jim Crow era policies of the South slide because it was good to do business. But I think people, this is something I think inside baseball people don't know about this, is most of those long-term contracts, particularly for like Netflix and Disney, are all going to be up starting at the end of this year, going into 2022, 2023. And what I mean by that is a lot of the TV shows like the CW canceled Black Lightning, which shoots in Atlanta, and the CW is owned by a New York-based company, CBS Viacom. Disney, obviously, we know is out in LA. Netflix is out in LA as well. Well, out at Northern California, not LA. But the moment all these either shows or long-term contracts at these sound stages come due, they could easily be like, all right, cool. Whoever the new governor is, we need you to change these voting issues. And the governor says, no, okay, cool. We're not going to renew any of our contracts. And as much as you think that that's going to hurt like the liberal media, we're talking literally billions of dollars in state money that's coming in and thousands of jobs for people and thousands of ancillary jobs, they're going to start rippling. So I think the film industry is actually going to strike first on that one, provided the marketplace where it goes. I do think the tech industry is going to come in as well, but they're going to have the opposite effect, which is when they start coming in, they're going to say, hey, Atlanta, give us as much carte blanche to do what we need to do without impunity. Do what San Francisco didn't do, which is like, we need you to bust out your homeless. We need you to allow for us to develop as many houses as you want. Don't have any restrictions on historic places or residential development. Do all the things Silicon Valley can't do, and we'll start bringing our money in as well. So you're going to start seeing both of those start pulling at different strings. And I do think they're going to have some real impact.
Well, this has been a very informative discussion, and I really appreciate King Williams taking time. And will you come back? Because I'd like to have you back to keep talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm around, man.
Cool. King Williams, documentary filmmaker, local journalist, lots of great insights and analysis. George Chidi, Decatur's contributor. Thank you both for joining us today. This is the Decatur's Twitch show. It's getting to be about 7 o'clock, so we're going to wrap this up. We will be back next week, and we have a great show. We actually know who our guests are going to be. It's so wonderful. We're going to have several state legislators, including Elena Parent, Mary Margaret Oliver, Kim Jackson. I believe Becky Payne is also going to join us as well, and they're going to talk about the most recent legislative session. They're going to talk about what's coming up with redistricting in the fall. That will be, yes, also a good follow on Twitter, King Williams. Is it I Am King Williams on Twitter?
Yes. Yeah, it's I Am King Williams everywhere.
Yeah, follow this man on Twitter. He's always got great insights and things to say. And so, yeah, it'll be a great show next week. And then the week after that, we're going to have the superintendent of City Schools of Decatur, Maggie Furman, is going to be joining us to take questions from the community about her new job. So we've got a pretty busy May lined up for everybody. So I'm really excited about it. Thank you both so much for joining us. Everyone, if you're out drinking tonight, please take an Uber. Don't drink and drive. Have a good and safe weekend, and we will see everybody next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Bye-bye.
All right.